There are good games and there are bad games. Then there are games that are so fundamentally frustrating that any positives or negatives that they might have are clouded by the pure, unbridled rage you experience when you play them. Horizon Forbidden West falls into that last category. Full disclosure, I went into this game expecting it to be a run of the mill, open world, third person shooter that would leave me unsatisfied if satiated of my need for that very type of game. I wasn't a fan of the original Horizon, and although I found its story to be captivating, something about its gameplay just never quite felt right to me. What I didn't expect was how wholly I would be consumed by the beauty and engrossing story of Forbidden West, or how quickly it would subvert the new, positive expectations it had set up for itself to become a jank fest that amplified every single flaw of its predecessor, yet again leaving me unsatisfied, but for entirely different reasons than the one I had expected. Every single aspect of this game can be described as being frustrating and janky in one way or another, but I'll start with the one I have the most gripes with: the gameplay. Forbidden West's gameplay is not hard by any stretch of the imagination, but it is filled with so many baffling decisions and band-aid solutions in the name of gameplay mechanics that it's hard to tell exactly how much of the challenge that it does present is intentional and how much of it is a happy accident of the game being unbalanced on any given difficulty. Credit where credit's due, there are a bunch of accessibility options that make the game's jank more manageable, but faffing about with the settings menu isn't exactly my idea of fun, and oh boy, was there a lot of doing just that. Here's the thing: I don't mind a difficult game, but I do absolutely mind a frustrating one. Aloy, Master Huntress, feels less like a competent archer using every tool in her very hefty toolbox and more like a ball being bounced between two seals at an unethical aquarium show, complete with the obscene price of entry. Aloy staggers at the mere mention of any damage, and this makes dealing with encounters where there are multiple machines firing at you from every which side an absolute pain to deal with. It's not the damage that's the problem. It's the difficulty that even the most competent player would have in dealing with the game's ample stagger animations that they'll see as they desperately try to get a single shot in that's truly aggravating. There's a lot of depth to Horizon's combat, what with the plethora of weapon types and ammo types that the game has to offer. It's only too bad, then, that what you'll be stuck with are the advanced hunter arrows because of the game's truly ridiculous crafting system. You know how people vilify games that present loot with higher and higher damage numbers and color graded rarities? Welcome to the Forbidden West, where we have all that and more. The more, of course, being the utterly egregious workbench upgrade system that requires you to collect tens of machine parts from the rarest of machines that need to be shot off in a very specific way before the machine itself is killed, and will quite likely be trampled into oblivion before the fight is done, forcing you to find more of the same type of enemy till all the stars align and the sun god looks down upon you as you finally harvest that one crafting item, only to realize that the game wants you to collect 5 more of the same thing, in addition to sacrificing your firstborn and pouring boiling water on your scalp to get to the first of 5 tiers of possible upgrades for a single weapon, which, may I remind you, may not even be the best one. Rinse and repeat for all the equipment you own. And this is what Horizon seems to do a lot of. Taking an innovative mechanic like the machine component removal and stretching it so thin that it becomes more tedious than engaging. That's what a lot of the open world comes down to as well. What at first seems like a break from the Ubisoft flavored slogfest that open world games have become evolves into one as it adds rebel outposts, which are different from rebel camps, which are different from the actually engaging puzzle sandbox ruins and combat centric cauldrons. The world map is entirely too big for its own good, and while a lot, and I mean an honestly staggering amount, of the side quests present compelling characters and fascinating story arcs, they're lost in the sea of busy work and go here and collect this and return for an item you'll sell as soon as you've got it, riff-raff that the genre has become known for. Of course, saying that the side quests are interesting is not the same as saying that they're mechanically engaging. Most of them boil down to Aloy using her focus to track the scent of whoever has gone missing this time. Although I suppose the greatest mystery is why she feels the need to remind you to pull up her focus each time this happens, when that's practically what you've been doing half the time you've been playing this game. Forbidden West is also the best example of a game trying to emulate its contemporaries while losing their appeal in translation. Case in point, The Glider. Borrowed straight from the latest Zelda title, it seems like a promising addition when taken in tandem with the highly improved climbing mechanics of the game. But while the climbing means that the game's mountains feel like an invitation to try and climb to their precipice, the gliding comes in handy only insofar as unintentional sequence breaking and being confused about why more enemies haven't spawned in yet. That's not the only device meant for exploration that feels hollow, though. The game tries to pull a Metroidvania by gating some areas till after you've got certain tools that can only be acquired by playing through the main story. Setting aside the fact that the game world isn't nearly tight enough to actually feel like a Metroidvania, the tools themselves are so utterly unexciting to use, what with their utility being limited to scripted press R2 to get rid of problem sections, that they feel more like unnecessary afterthoughts than actual mechanics. So the shooting is janky and the exploration is janky. But maybe the game does better on mechanics it introduces to the series for the first time? Well, I am glad you asked, because there are exactly two new things that it tries to do, and one of them it fails spectacularly at, while the other it doesn't have the shame to cover up. Firstly, the game introduces melee combat, adding a few combos that you can learn through a skill tree that's three-fourths redundant, as well as vault over animations that I last saw in the Tomb Raider Legend trilogy, and a whole lot of frustration for anyone who dares to play around with these new mechanics. There's no manual lock on, so Aloy just hits whoever she feels like hitting. The melee combat you're fighting against can also easily stagger you and parry for no apparent reason, and there is no parry for you to reciprocate attacks using. And there are enemies who can attack through your attacks, in addition to enemies with shields whom there is no real viable tactic to deploy against. The second mechanic is Machine Strike, a board game within Forbidden West that requires you to harvest even more machine parts to stand a winning chance against your competitors, and that's absolutely trying to imitate the success of games like The Witcher 3's Gwent. Let's shift our attention, or shall I say, focus, to what drew me in the first place, the story. Many reviews of this game talked about how the story of Forbidden West was doomed to fail because it couldn't hold the raw intrigue of Aloy's identity and the post apocalyptic world that made the first one so successful. While I'm inclined to agree with that, I feel like Forbidden West makes a case for the opposite. The knowledge that both the player and Aloy have acquired is a tough pill to swallow. The sequel is in a unique position to have the player and Aloy navigate the burden that comes with this knowledge, to show how this knowledge has changed Aloy's outlook and her interactions with others. It's great then that Aloy hasn't let it get to her head. Lol, JK, I think I heard everybody who's played through the game let out a collective chuckle. As much as Forbidden West wants the player to believe that Aloy hates titles like Savior of Meridian, play through the game and you'll be forced to confront the reality that she'd probably prefer a title more akin to Savior of the Whole Wide World, Please Step on Me Machine Mommy. Every single interaction that Aloy has in the main game or otherwise positions her as this self absorbed narcissist who's doing you a favor by so much as gazing in your direction. Any character growth she underwent in the first game has been completely overwritten. Aloy has essentially become a character study of a narcissist. The plot itself feels like it's oscillating between being too stretched out and too rushed at the same time. Plot beats that deserve time to be fully explored are sometimes ignored to give Aloy the time to go and do some random busy work. I did enjoy how the game opened up and gave me multiple objectives to tackle with complete freedom for choosing between them, and the new tribes it introduced were great to learn about. The only problem there is that some of the learning had to come in the form of boring side quests that erred on the side of caution while dealing with the complexities of religion in a post apocalyptic setting where the gods are essentially tuned up versions of real life people from the modern world, and having to bear Aloy's constant arrogance definitely didn't help with that. The plot also does not stick the landing. Elizabeth Sobeck remains about as infallible as she was in the first game, perhaps even more so since the plot hinges on other people's love for her being taken to an extreme. The Far Zenith and their vulnerability becomes known way too early for them to be seen as a serious threat for too long. And the ending makes the plot as a whole seem somewhat pointless and makes the Far Zeniths look like misunderstood mall gods that Aloy and her gang committed genocide on. A lot of the pains the plot bears are by virtue of it being the second in a trilogy. The lack of a satisfying conclusion and the undoing of past character development is a direct consequence of this game's position in the Horizon timeline, But I will say that the campaign kept me hooked for its entire runtime. Annoying as Aloy and her ability to have people bow before her greatness may be, there's enough emotional drama and old world centric intrigue here to keep players interested till the very end. To round off, here's a fun thing that I haven't heard enough people complain about. You know what's the best way to get people to buy new DLC you have planned for a game? Introduce one of the most sought after mechanics from the original right at the end of the sequel, only to underutilize it severely before making it the focal point of paid DLC. The flying mount comes right near the end of the game, and it's the best example of the plot feeling too rushed thing I was talking about. Sure, the mount is a great way of traversing the humongous world of Forbidden West, gawking at its beautiful vistas, but there's no meaningful integration of the mount into the game's mechanics, and its quests never seem to go beyond drop object A at point B for a slight combat advantage. I know that this critique of the game has been quite negative. The game isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It just feels like there's so much wasted potential. There's a lot that Gorilla could have done if they'd just settled for providing a more contained experience instead of bloating the game in the same way that so many studios feel pressured to do these days. What emerges from this mess isn't a diamond in the rough, not some brilliant game overshadowed by the likes of Elden Ring that released near the same time. It's a flawed experience that has room to improve. The funny thing is, I'm actually quite optimistic about the finale of this trilogy. There's the makings of an actually exciting, innovative game in here somewhere, and all I can really hope is that Gorilla are able to weld one together as the trilogy rounds off. But what I really want is for that game to release at the same time as Bloodborne 2 or Dark Souls 4 or something because oh my god, that would be so funny.